Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Brandon always had a very clear idea of what he wanted in life. From a young age, he carried a simple yet increasingly rare desire, to build a true family. The kind you look at and feel proud of. Where there's partnership, love, respect, and security. He was always that kind of man. The kind who believes in the value of commitment, who sees marriage as more than just a beautiful ceremony or a piece of paper. For him, it was a symbol. A pact that went beyond words. It was about putting out into the world, in a clear way, that this love had an owner, had responsibility, that it was something to be nurtured every single day. When he met Sophie, everything seemed to make sense. She was fun, charismatic, with a smile that made any worry disappear. She was the kind of woman who could walk into any place and, within minutes, everyone would be charmed. Brandon fell in love quickly, and he fell hard. In the first few months, everything was perfect. They went out together, planned trips, laughed at silly things, spent nights talking about life, dreams, and the future. And it was during these conversations that he noticed something that bothered him more than he cared to admit. Every time the topic of marriage came up, Sophie would dodge it. She'd change the subject, make a joke, steer the conversation elsewhere. Over time, what seemed like just a playful avoidance took on a more serious tone. She started making it clear that she didn't care much for marriage. She said it was something society imposed, just a piece of paper, and that true love didn't need those kinds of ties. That what mattered was living together, the connection, not a signature. Brandon, at first, tried not to dwell too much on it. He convinced himself that she just needed time. After all, they loved each other, and that was obvious. He believed that as the years went by, she would understand that formalizing their love wasn't about pressure but about care, about protection. That it was about them, about what they were building together, not about pleasing the outside world. Time passed, and despite his efforts to avoid it, that issue started weighing heavily on him. Watching his friends getting married, some starting families, others buying houses, building things together, made him question whether he was heading in the right direction. Because, although their life together was good, it always felt like something was missing. It was as if he was giving everything he had, betting all his chips on that love, and in return, he was only receiving part of what Sophie was willing to give, on her own terms and within her limits. And even though she made it clear that she loved him, that she wanted to be with him, every time he brought up the subject, her response was always the same. Something like, "Why do you need this? What changes? We already live like we're married." And deep down, this hurt more than he admitted. Because it wasn't just about wanting a party or status. It was about feeling that she was willing to commit in the same way he was. About knowing that their love was strong enough to declare to the world, not just lived secretly behind closed doors. Still, Brandon chose to keep moving forward. Because for him, loving also meant giving in. It meant understanding that people aren't exactly how we wish they were. That everyone has their traumas, fears, and experiences. And because he believed Sophie was the woman of his life, he decided to wait. To wait for her to realize on her own, in her own time, that marriage wasn't a prison or an imposition. It was just confirmation that they were walking together, toward the same place, with the same dreams and purposes. The problem was that while Brandon believed this, Sophie had a completely different perspective. And little by little, what was hope for him became a burden for her. Something she needed to avoid, run away from, pretend didn't exist. And without Brandon noticing, that love he treated as a priority, Sophie was starting to put on the back burner. She began valuing her own freedom, her own desires, her belief in living without constraints. And that's when, without realizing it, she started making decisions that would sooner or later have devastating consequences. Decisions that, once revealed, would completely change the course of both their lives. And there would be no going back. Brandon was in another state, focused on important training for his career, when he received a message that froze his entire body. It was from Sophie. Short, direct, and completely out of context. She wrote only that she needed to talk, that she had made a mistake, that she didn't know how to tell him. For a few seconds, he thought it might be some misunderstanding, maybe a silly argument, a work problem, something simple that she was exaggerating. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. His heart raced. His hands started sweating. His head felt heavy, as if suddenly a million thoughts were crashing into each other. He tried calling her, but she didn't answer. He sent a message, and she only replied that it was serious and that it had to be in person. At that moment, he didn't think twice. He interrupted everything he was doing, told his supervisor he needed to handle an urgent matter, and caught the first flight back home. The trip felt endless. His chest tightened as if every minute of waiting was torture. Brandon tried to mentally prepare for anything, but no matter how many scenarios he imagined, none came close to what he was about to hear. As soon as he arrived, he opened the door, looked around, and noticed something strange in Sophie's eyes. She was restless, pacing back and forth, fidgeting with her hands, breathing heavily. She wouldn't even look directly at him. It was as if she wanted to be anywhere but there. Brandon realized immediately that this wasn't just a casual conversation. He asked what was happening, urging her to be direct. And she was. With a shaky, trembling voice, she let out the words that shattered everything inside him. She said she was pregnant. But before he could even react, she added, the baby wasn't his. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Brandon stared at her, trying to process it. For a few seconds, he stood completely still, staring, hoping she would say it was a lie, some cruel joke, that she had lost her mind, anything that could make it not real. But Sophie was serious, nervous, tears welling up in her eyes, waiting for his reaction. She then revealed that, a few months ago, during a period when things between them had been somewhat distant, she ended up getting involved with a coworker. His name was Derek. At first, according to her, it was just an exchange of messages, silly conversations, venting about life. And before she knew it, they were meeting outside of work hours. She said it all happened quickly, that she let herself get carried away, that she didn't plan it, that she didn't know how it had gotten to this point. Brandon listened to everything in silence. He didn't interrupt. He just looked at her, with a mix of disbelief, disappointment, and pain that felt too big to contain. Each word coming out of her mouth felt like a blade cutting through him. And when she finished speaking, he simply took a deep breath, turned his back, went upstairs, entered the guest room, grabbed a pillow, a blanket, and lay down. He didn't have the strength to argue, to fight, or to try to understand anything more. It was as if, within minutes, everything they had built together had been thrown in the trash. And he didn't even know how to react. His mind spun, his stomach churned, and his chest hurt like never before. That night, lying there, staring at the ceiling, Brandon mentally replayed every detail of the past few years. The conversations, the plans, the promises. He tried to figure out when it all started to fall apart. He searched for signs, clues, anything that might have shown that Sophie was willing to throw it all away. And as much as he searched, he realized that many times he had chosen to ignore things that now made complete sense. He remembered moments when she seemed distant, outings that seemed innocent, conversations she avoided, nights when she said she was too tired, that she had stayed late at work. All of it now fit together in a cruel way, like a movie playing in his head, showing scenes he had refused to see at the time. And contrary to what many might imagine, he didn't feel anger. What Brandon felt at that moment was a void so vast, so overwhelming, it felt like his soul had been ripped out. Because for someone who truly loves, there is no greater pain than being betrayed by the one you trusted, protected, respected, and placed above everything else. That night, he understood that no matter how much it hurt, no matter how much it destroyed everything inside him, what was about to happen from that point on would completely change his life. Because from that moment on, he would never be the same man again. Brandon woke up before the alarm rang. He spent a few seconds staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out if all of this was really happening or if it was one of those nightmares where you wake up sweating. Unfortunately, it was real. He got up, went to the kitchen, made a strong coffee, and sat there in silence, watching his life crumble right in front of him. He didn't even notice how long he stayed like that until he heard footsteps coming from the hallway. When he turned, he saw Sophie. She appeared, a bit awkwardly, with that look of someone who knows they've done something unforgivable but pretends that maybe things can still be fixed. She tried to act like it was just another morning. She grabbed a mug, poured some coffee, and stood there next to him, waiting for him to say something. But Brandon kept silent. She then took a deep breath and, in a low voice that almost sounded like a whisper, said, "We need to talk." Brandon gripped the mug tightly, looked at her, and responded dryly, "Talk about what? You want me to help you pick out the baby's name?" Sophie lowered her head, gripping the mug so hard it seemed like it might break. She tried to argue. She said it was a mistake, that she was lost, that she didn't know how it happened, that it didn't make sense, that it was just a slip-up. That what they had was much bigger, that she didn't want to throw it all away over a stupid mistake. Brandon held back a nervous laugh. He squeezed his eyes shut and shook his head in disbelief before responding, "A slip-up? Are you looking me in the eye and telling me it was a slip-up? You cheated on me, got pregnant by another guy, and you're saying it was a slip-up?" And more, he took a deep breath, holding back the rage exploding inside him. "Are you asking me to raise another man's child? The child of a guy who slept with the woman who was theoretically my wife? By the way, you never wanted to be my wife, did you? You always ran away from that. And now I understand why. Marriage would mean commitment. It would mean respect. And that's exactly what you never had for me." Sophie tried to interrupt, shaking her head, crying, saying he was exaggerating, that it wasn't like that. But Brandon didn't let her. He continued, firmer now, his voice mixing pain and indignation, "You never wanted to get married because you always wanted to keep the door open for this kind of thing. You wanted the freedom to live however you pleased. To choose when it was convenient to be my girlfriend and when it was convenient to be single for others." She was left speechless. Tears streamed down her face, she trembled, but couldn't respond. She tried again to soften the situation. "I'm not going to argue. You're heated, we'll talk better tonight. I need to go to work." Brandon let out a sarcastic smile, crossed his arms, and replied bluntly, "Yeah, go ahead. If pretending life is normal is your thing, you're an expert at it, aren't you?" Sophie didn't respond. She left, went straight to the bathroom, slammed the door, and stayed there for a few minutes. As the shower water ran, Brandon stood frozen, staring into space, trying to figure out if this was really the woman he had loved all these years or if, in fact, he had never truly known who she was. When she came out, already dressed, she avoided looking him in the eye. She grabbed her bag, fixed her hair, took a deep breath, and before leaving, said one last thing, "We'll talk tonight, Brandon, you're too worked up right now." He didn't respond. He just watched her leave, closing the door as if nothing had happened. But inside, he already knew. That would be the last night she would set foot in that house as part of his life. And from that moment on, Brandon began planning the coldest, most calculated, and straightforward move of his entire life. Brandon stood there motionless, staring at the closed door, processing everything that had just happened. His mind was racing, but unlike the night before, he wasn't lost anymore. This time, something inside him had changed. It was as if, suddenly, a switch had flipped. It no longer made sense to keep questioning what led Sophie to do that or to try to figure out where he went wrong. In fact, he realized he had spent years investing everything in someone who, from the start, never shared the same vision of the future as him. She had simply accepted the emotional security he offered while always keeping a part of herself disconnected, free, ready to do exactly what she did. He took a deep breath, picked up his laptop, opened the spreadsheets, and started reviewing everything. He checked the house purchase contract, reviewed documents, pulled financial records, scrutinized every line carefully. Everything, absolutely everything, was in his name. There were no joint accounts, no cars in both names, no shared financing. He hadn't realized it before, but that old discomfort Sophie always showed when the topic of marriage came up now made perfect sense. She never wanted a formal bond, never wanted to share anything, because deep down, she always kept an escape route open. She was fully aware that, should something like this ever happen, she would leave without any obligations, without any real commitment. Brandon took a deep breath, clenched his jaw, picked up his phone, and called a lawyer he had known and trusted for years. He told him everything, every detail, every conversation, every action. On the other end of the line, the lawyer listened silently, absorbing every piece of information. When Brandon finished, the response was direct, firm, and objective. The situation was entirely in his favor. Sophie had no rights to the house or his assets. The only thing they needed to ensure was that everything was done legally, with documentation, records, protocols, and zero room for any future disputes. He hung up the phone and, without wasting time, started emptying her closet. Clothes, shoes, bags, makeup, personal items, all were carefully packed into suitcases and boxes. Every item he touched felt heavier than it should, as if loaded with memories, broken promises, conversations that now sounded fake, and moments that, looking back, he realized may not have been entirely real. Each closed suitcase marked the end of a phase in his life. When he finished, he grabbed a piece of paper, handwrote a clear, direct note with no room for interpretation. It stated that she had until 6 p.m. the following day to remove all her belongings from the house. From that point on, any communication between them would only happen through lawyers. No more conversations, arguments, or reconciliations. It was over. Final. And above all else, he was preserving whatever little dignity she still had. Time seemed to pass differently as he organized everything. His mind was sharp, cold, and objective. For the first time, Brandon wasn't letting emotions take over. Everything was rational, practical, strategic. And in a way, this made him feel alive again. As if breaking apart had finally helped him understand who he truly was and what he was capable of. When he finished organizing everything, he looked at the house and realized that this place, which once represented love, safety, and the future, now just felt like a property. 4 walls and a roof. Nothing more. And he knew that, for him to live again, this needed to be completely remodeled. Mentally, he started planning, changing the locks, moving the furniture, repainting, renewing everything. Erasing every trace of her from that place. Around 5 in the afternoon, Sophie returned from work. She arrived, opened the door, and stopped the second she stepped inside. She saw the suitcases lined up in the hallway, the boxes, everything separated. She went pale. She stopped, dropped her bag on the floor, and stood silently, trying to process whether this was really happening. Brandon was sitting, waiting, exactly as he had planned. He stood up, looked her in the eyes, and spoke with a calmness that bordered on unsettling. "You have until 6 o'clock tomorrow evening to take your things from here. From now on, any matters between us will be handled through lawyers. No conversation, no discussion, no appeal." Sophie stood motionless for a few seconds. Then, stuttering, she tried to argue, "Brandon, we don't need this. We can work it out. I already told you, it was a mistake. We can get past it. We have history, a life together. You can't throw everything away like this." He laughed, shook his head, crossed his arms, and responded firmly, "I'm not throwing it away. You're the one who threw it away. I'm just picking up the pieces of what's left." She started crying, tried to approach him, tried to hold his hand. She said they could talk, that they were both upset, that they needed to cool off, think, and understand. That he couldn't do this, not like this, not so definitively. She said it was just a rough patch, that they could go to therapy, that she was willing to fix things. But Brandon cut her off immediately. Willing now? After getting pregnant by another man? After cheating on me behind my back with someone from work? Do you really think this can be fixed? I'm a man, Sophie. I respect myself. You may not respect yourself, but I do. You're leaving here without taking a single thing. And you'll remember this for the rest of your life. She took a deep breath, tried to hold back her tears, and whispered, "You're being cruel." He didn't respond right away. He stared at her, choosing his words carefully, letting the silence weigh heavily for the longest moment before replying, "Cruel? Cruel is what you did. I'm just giving you what you chose for yourself." Sophie, realizing she had no more room to argue, turned around, grabbed the suitcases and her bag, and left, slamming the door behind her. She went straight to her mother's house. A few hours later, and as expected, it didn't take long for her to start playing the victim. She told the story her way, the way that was most convenient for her. And of course, she conveniently omitted the most important part. Brandon was calm, sitting on the couch reviewing some documents when his phone started ringing. He looked at the screen and saw the name, Sophie's mom. He took a deep breath, thought for a moment whether he should answer, but decided to go ahead. He put it on speakerphone and stayed silent, just listening. As soon as he answered, she launched into it. She came at him full force, barely pausing between sentences. "You're a monster. How could you do this? Kick out a pregnant woman? What kind of man are you? This isn't something you do, not even to a dog. You're cruel, cold, inhuman. This is psychological violence, you know. Do you think you'll get away with this? I'm going to report you. This is abandonment. It's emotional abuse. I'm going to the police station, I'm taking you to court. You won't get away with this, mark my words." Brandon stayed still, listening to everything without interrupting. Her words came like knives, one after another. She was yelling, angry, completely out of control, as if he were the villain of the story, as if everything happening was his fault. He waited for her to finish her tirade. And when he sensed she paused briefly to catch her breath, he interjected, his voice extremely calm, firm, and measured. "Can I ask you one question?" On the other end, she fell silent for 2 seconds, and he continued, "Did she tell you, that the baby in her belly, isn't mine? I just want to know that. Please, answer me. Just that." The silence that followed was heavier than any words she could have said. Brandon stayed still, staring at the phone, hearing only her heavy breathing. It was as if she had been struck by lightning. He took a deep breath, gripped the phone tightly, and pressed further, even more directly, "I listened to you insult me, call me every name in the book. You had all the energy in the world for that. So now, have at least the decency to answer this one question. Did she tell you, yes or no, that this baby isn't mine?" The silence lingered for a few more seconds, until she tried to cover it up. This must be some misunderstanding. Brandon closed his eyes, slowly shook his head, and smirked, the kind of smirk that shows he understands exactly the kind of people he's dealing with. Without apologizing or retracting any of the insults she had hurled minutes earlier, she simply hung up. And that sharp click of the phone ending the call was, for Brandon, the final confirmation that he wasn't just freeing himself from a woman who had betrayed him, he was liberating himself from an entire family that thrived on lies, disrespect, and hypocrisy. And in that moment, he had absolute certainty that, as painful as it was, this was the best decision of his life. Time passed. Life moved on, as it always does, with or without scars. Brandon focused on work, took care of the house, rebuilt his routine, and most importantly, his peace. There were no more messages, calls, arguments, or any contact with Sophie. It was as if she had simply vanished from the map. Until one day, while having coffee at a bakery, he ran into an old friend. The conversation started casually, until the friend blurted out, a bit awkwardly, holding back a smile, "Man, you won't believe what I heard." Apparently, Sophie told Derek about the pregnancy. But guess what? Derek flat out told her that the baby wasn't his. Turned his back on her and walked away like she was nothing. Brandon stayed silent, just listening, without reacting. The friend continued, "Obviously, she didn't accept it. She took it to court, demanded a DNA test, and even got a judge involved. And, to everyone's surprise, the baby was Derek's." At that moment, Brandon let out a faint smile, not one of mockery or revenge, but one of relief. Because even though deep down he already suspected, having that confirmation brought him peace. And he thought something he never imagined he would think, that if, by chance, that baby had been his, he would have taken care of it with all the love and responsibility in the world. Because he knew who he was. But he would have done it alone, without Sophie in his life, because after everything, she was the one piece that no longer fit into his future. The friend let out a short laugh, shook his head, and added, "And you know the best part? Derek had to acknowledge the baby because now it's in court, it's official, there's no way out. But acknowledging Sophie, well, that's another story. He made it crystal clear that he doesn't want to, he won't, and it never crossed his mind." Brandon held his coffee, stared into space, thinking about everything. And he couldn't help but reflect on the thought that came to him, almost as if it were an inevitable conclusion. What irony, she spent years saying marriage was just a piece of paper, commitment was a prison, she didn't need ties, she wanted freedom, and now here she is. Pregnant. Alone. And in the end, no one wants to claim her. He took a deep breath, slowly shook his head, and with all the serenity of someone who knows they made the right choice, simply said, "Life, it collects its dues. And it collects them precisely." Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.
Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Zachary landed at the Charlotte airport carrying not only a suitcase but also an intense mix of relief and longing. After years of completing missions, he was back. All he wanted at that moment was to hug his kids and reunite with Vanessa. The plan was simple: pick up the car, stop by the boys' favorite coffee shop, buy those cookies they loved, and finally arrive home as a surprise. At least, that's what he imagined. In recent months, communication with Vanessa and the kids had been a bit different. The messages weren't as frequent, and when they did come, they seemed empty, automatic, lacking the emotion they once had. He noticed it, felt a little anxious, but tried to convince himself it must be just the distance, the exhaustion, the heavy routine, and that in person, everything would go back to normal. After all, that's what always happened. When he was away, things got a little cold, but it only took coming back home, hugging the boys, looking into Vanessa's eyes, and everything would fall back into place. As he walked toward the baggage claim, he pulled out his phone to let them know he had arrived. As soon as he turned on the device, he noticed a single notification, a voicemail. Right away, he imagined it was some kind of greeting from the kids, one of those messages they used to record when he was away. He put on his earphones and hit play. But as soon as he heard the voice, he felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath him. It was Vanessa. Only it wasn't the sweet voice he knew. It was cold, dry, calculated. Her words came like stabs to the chest. She said the locks had been changed, that the kids were fine but preferred not to see him, and to make it very clear, it was over between them. No room for conversation, no margin for doubt. Direct, cruel, final. For a few seconds, he stood still, staring into nothingness, trying to process if he had heard correctly. His brain tried desperately to make sense of it all. He thought maybe it was a mistake, an impulse, a temporary crisis. It didn't make sense. They argued, like any couple, but never, not once, had she shown anything so extreme. And the kids? How could they not want to see him? It simply didn't compute. He tried calling her right away. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried again. And again. Same result. He took a deep breath, swallowed hard, and while pulling his suitcase, tried calling the house phone. Call cut off. His heart raced. This couldn't be real. He grabbed the contact for his oldest son and hit call. Call rejected. He tried the youngest. Also rejected. Panic started tightening his chest. His breathing grew heavy. It felt like he was being punched over and over, without time to react. He got into the car and headed straight home. Every mile felt heavier, more suffocating. When he turned onto the street, he saw the house. It was there, just as he left it. At least, on the outside. He parked the car, got out, walked to the door, and tried turning the doorknob. Locked. He tried again, as if that would change anything. He rang the doorbell. Once, twice, 3 times. Absolute silence. He looked through the windows, searching for any sign. No movement. No voices. No sounds. He looked around and saw one of the neighbors inside a pickup truck parked at the corner, someone he'd known for years. He walked over, knocked on the window, which took a while to roll down. The man seemed uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. Zachary asked what was going on, if he knew anything. With some hesitation, the neighbor admitted that Vanessa had told everyone that Zachary was distant, absent, and that she was moving on with her life, raising the kids alone. And that any attempt by him to show up could be seen as an invasion. Each word hit him like a hammer to the head. It was as if pieces of his own history were being ripped away, distorted beyond recognition. He ran to the backyard, hoping the spare key they always hid was still there, behind that old board on the fence. He stuck his hand into the space, empty. She had taken it. That confirmed it wasn't an impulse, not a sudden outburst, not a misunderstanding. It was planned. It was final. It was real. He sat back in the car, threw his phone on the seat, and squeezed his eyes shut, holding back a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. The man who had faced war zones, survived impossible missions, and dealt with situations most wouldn't even dare to imagine, was now there, defeated. But this wasn't a physical defeat, it was a pain no amount of military training in the world could prepare someone for. He picked up the phone again. And this time, without hesitating, he called Dylan. As soon as Dylan answered, Zachary went straight to the point, no beating around the bush, I need you. This has turned into a war. From the other end, the response came immediately, firm and unquestioning, tell me where you are. And in that exact moment, Zachary realized the life he knew simply no longer existed. The battle he was about to face would be the hardest of them all, and this time, it wasn't a military mission, it was personal. Dylan knew that if Zachary was calling him, it meant the situation had gone beyond limits. And it wasn't just any problem. It was serious, heavy, something that was out of control. As soon as they met, there was no time for small talk. Zachary told him everything, every detail. From the messages that had started to cool off in recent weeks, to arriving at the airport and receiving the cruel message saying the locks had been changed and that his kids didn't want to see him anymore. And worse, that the marriage was over. Just like that. Without explanation, without warning, without a chance for dialogue. Dylan listened to it all, trying to make sense of it alongside him. He knew Vanessa. He had spent time with her at parties, barbecues, family gatherings. None of this made sense. A sudden separation like this, without any opening for conversation, didn't seem normal. Especially considering Zachary had been away on work duty, serving his country. It was absurd to think that, out of nowhere, she simply erased him from her life and the lives of their kids. The first thought that crossed Dylan's mind was, something is very wrong with this story. A separation, no matter how difficult, doesn't happen like this. Not with someone changing locks, cutting off all contact, and turning the kids against their father. This isn't just a decision out of weariness, out of fights, or out of relationship fatigue. This carries more weight. There's more to it. That's when Dylan asked the question Zachary couldn't stop asking himself, what do you think is behind all this? But no matter how much he thought about it, he couldn't find an answer. In the past few months, they had some arguments, of course. The fact that he was always away, the absences, the difficulties that military life imposes on any family, all of that weighed heavily. But he never imagined it would be enough reason for her to take such an extreme step, especially involving the kids. That's when they decided to dig deeper. They needed to understand what was really going on. If she wasn't offering an explanation, then they would go after the truth themselves. But they couldn't just start asking around. That would only make things worse, potentially leading to accusations, bigger fights, and even jeopardizing any possibility of resolving the situation in court. Dylan, who had contact with a trusted private investigator, suggested hiring his services. A guy named Alex, who had worked on dozens of similar cases. Discreet, efficient, someone who knew how to uncover what people went out of their way to hide. Zachary hesitated for a few minutes. He never imagined he'd one day need to hire someone to investigate his own wife. But looking at the reality of it, he realized he had no choice. It was either that or live in the dark, accepting a version of events that clearly wasn't complete. When they spoke with Alex, Zachary was clear, he wanted to understand what had happened. He needed to know if Vanessa was okay, where she was, how the kids were doing, and most importantly, what motivated such a radical cutoff. If she truly wanted to separate, fine, but not like this, not by ripping the kids away from him, not erasing him from the history of their family. Alex explained that before anything else, he would conduct a full sweep, checks on public databases, information on recent movements, new rental contracts, financial transactions, social media history, and even physical surveillance, if necessary. The work would be discreet, without raising suspicion. No direct approach, just gathering information. In the days that followed, while Alex began his work, Zachary was caught in a whirlwind of thoughts. He relived every recent conversation with Vanessa, trying to remember if there had been any signs he missed. Any phrase, any look, any change in behavior that could make sense now. And indeed, he started remembering. He recalled that in the last few weeks, she had been colder, responding to messages more bluntly, without the affection she used to show. Sometimes, she didn't respond at all. And the video calls that used to happen almost daily became increasingly spaced out until they completely stopped. At the time, he tried convincing himself it was just the hectic routine, the stress, the natural wear and tear. But now, looking at it all from the outside, he realized that wasn't normal. It never was. While processing all of this, he stayed at Dylan's house, who, besides opening his doors, proved to be one of the few who was truly on his side, ready to face this storm, whatever the truth behind it all might be. While Alex did his part, Zachary tried, in his own way, to seek answers. He called some mutual friends, trying to understand if anyone knew anything. But the responses were always vague, filled with silence, discomfort. Some said she seemed fine, that she was reorganizing her life, but no one went into details. Others simply avoided the topic. The feeling was that many people knew something but chose not to get involved. What hurt the most wasn't even the end of the marriage, it was the fact that he was being treated like a complete stranger by his own kids. That, more than anything, cut like a blade. Because, no matter how physically absent he might have been, he never stopped being a father. He was always present in their lives, even from afar. He always called, kept up with them, participated however he could. And now, it was as if he had never existed. As the days passed, Alex's report began to take shape. And Zachary knew that when it landed in his hands, his life could change completely. Because by that point, he had already understood one thing: this wasn't just a simple separation. It was deeper, darker. And if there was a hidden truth behind all of this, he was willing to go all the way to uncover it. When Alex finally reached out, his tone already hinted at bad news. He asked to meet in person because there was a lot to show, and it would be impossible to explain everything over the phone. That same afternoon, Zachary and Dylan were sitting in the living room, facing Alex, ready to hear it all. Alex placed a folder on the table. It was thick, heavy. He opened it, spread out some documents, printed photos, reports, and began. He said that initially, he started tracking Vanessa's movements over the past few months. He discovered that she had indeed moved out of the house they shared, but she wasn't doing it alone. There were suspicious financial movements, recent rental contracts under another address, and above all, records of trips taken on specific dates, precisely those days when she claimed to be too busy to answer calls or reply to messages. But what turned the investigation around was a simple detail: Vanessa wasn't reorganizing her life alone. In the photos, there was always the same man. Tall, well-dressed, usually driving different cars, mostly luxury ones. Most of the time, they were seen entering or leaving restaurants, malls, or hotels. There was no room for doubt about the kind of relationship they had. And that hit Zachary like a punch to the gut. The man's name? Marcus Callahan. A real estate entrepreneur. Public, well-known, seemingly successful, with an impeccable image on social media and in the local community. But as Alex made clear, image is just a facade. And when they dug deeper, what they found was simply terrifying. Marcus had an absurd history of parallel relationships. It wasn't just that he got involved with married women. It was almost a lifestyle. They found records of at least 4 recent cases, all following the same pattern. Women who, at some point, were vulnerable, going through separations, marital crises, or emotional struggles. He would appear in their lives offering everything they dreamed of hearing. Stability, affection, attention, promises of a better future, financial security, and unconditional love. He made them believe they were about to live a fairy tale. One of the stories was about Rachel, a teacher from Houston. She met Marcus at a real estate event. Within a few months, she quit everything. She resigned from her job, sold her house, and moved in with him, believing they were starting a life together. 3 months later, she discovered Marcus had another woman living in San Diego, experiencing the exact same story. Another victim was Melanie, from Orlando. A mother of 2, recently divorced, thinking she had found a wonderful man. Until the day she accidentally answered a call on his phone, and on the other end was a woman asking if he had already finalized his divorce so they could start their life together. Right then, she realized she wasn't the only one. And it got worse. Beyond the relationships, Marcus operated an extremely sophisticated financial fraud scheme. The pattern was almost always the same: after gaining the women's trust, he subtly convinced them to open joint bank accounts in international banks, typically in tax havens like the Cayman Islands, Belize, or Luxembourg, under the pretext of asset protection, dollar investments, or starting a company to ensure the couple's financial security. In practice, he used the victim's personal data to set up legal structures abroad, such as offshore companies and shell corporations. Once the company was established, he requested million-dollar loans from international banks or private credit platforms operating outside traditional regulatory systems, using false guarantees or inflating the victim's financial capacity. Many of these institutions, located in jurisdictions with low fiscal transparency, didn't require rigorous in-person validation, just digitalized documents, corporate contracts, and sworn income declarations. With this, Marcus built a robust financial profile in the women's names, often without them even realizing it. All it took was convincing them to sign a few documents under pretexts like banking regularization or tax optimization. Once the loan was approved, amounts that easily exceeded $500,000 to $2 million, depending on the victim, he quickly transferred the money to third-party accounts, distributing the funds across various digital wallets, cryptocurrencies, and other hard-to-trace assets. As soon as the money was secure and out of reach, Marcus simply disappeared from the women's lives, ended the relationship, and left them with the full debt they didn't even know existed. The victims only found out when they started receiving notifications from international banks, collection letters, or worse, when their names were added to restrictive international credit lists like World Check, along with facing account freezes and transnational lawsuits for defaulting on contracts they didn't know existed. This type of fraud is known in legal circles as international document fraud, associated with money laundering and financial fraud through falsified identity, a highly complex crime involving corporate, banking, and international criminal law. And by that point, Marcus had already left at least 3 women in a state of international insolvency, with combined losses exceeding $8 million. There, in front of all of that, it became clear that Marcus wasn't just an adulterer or an emotional manipulator. He was a high-level criminal. A financial predator disguised as Prince Charming. When Alex placed a dossier on the table with photos, WhatsApp conversations, social media screenshots, and even security camera footage showing Vanessa and Marcus entering a hotel together, Zachary felt as if his entire body lost its strength. It was a shock. A mix of anger, sadness, and disappointment. As much as, deep down, he had started to suspect something, seeing it all laid out there, materialized, tearing apart any hope that it was all just a misunderstanding, felt like getting shot. But that wasn't all. The investigations showed that Vanessa wasn't being deceived. She knew exactly what she was getting herself into. In several conversations, she herself talked about plans to move to another state with Marcus. She mentioned selling everything she owned, cutting all ties with Charlotte, and starting over, as if the life she had with Zachary and the kids was just a chapter to be forgotten. The most infuriating part was reading a message where she clearly stated that she was tired of waiting for a man who lives for work, who's never present, and deserves someone who's truly willing to be part of her life every day. As if all the years Zachary spent away, risking his life, hadn't been for that family. As if everything he did had been useless. Dylan, who was beside him, slammed the table. The indignation was so great that words failed him. It was unbelievable that someone they knew, lived with, and considered a friend, was capable of such betrayal, such coldness, such cowardice. Zachary, however, took a deep breath. The pain was immense, but something inside him began to shift. Because at that moment, he realized this wasn't about saving a marriage anymore. The marriage was already over. It was about protecting his own dignity, protecting his children, and ensuring that people like Marcus didn't destroy any more of his life. He picked up that dossier, looked intently at each photo, each document, each detail, and with a firm voice, said just one thing: now she's going to meet the other side of me. Zachary knew he couldn't act impulsively. As much as every fiber of his body screamed to confront Vanessa immediately, bang on her door, and throw all of this in her face, he took a deep breath and did what he always learned during the most critical missions of his life: control, strategy, precision. The first step was organizing all the evidence Alex provided. Photos, conversations, fraudulent contracts, suspicious financial transactions, offshore company setups using third-party documents, and all records of Marcus's parallel relationships. Each piece of information was cataloged, dated, and organized so there wouldn't be any gaps. Dylan helped build the timeline, connecting events, names of victims, and financial operations carried out. When everything was ready, Zachary called Morgan Sullivan, his lawyer, and explained everything. Morgan was shocked, not just by the magnitude of the emotional betrayal, but also by the severity of the financial crimes involved. And it was she who made the suggestion that changed the course of the entire story. She said, "Zachary, this isn't just a divorce issue anymore. This is federal crime. And very serious. It's something for the FBI." Without wasting time, Morgan made the necessary contacts. She knew an FBI agent specializing in financial crimes and international fraud, Agent Matthew Carter. They scheduled a meeting for the next morning. For hours, Zachary, Morgan, Dylan, and Alex presented the entire dossier. They detailed every suspicious transaction, the connections between the shell companies, the fraudulent loans, the misuse of victims' data, and most importantly, the money laundering through tax havens. Agent Matthew was impressed by the wealth of details. He said that Marcus was already being monitored in preliminary investigations due to similar allegations, but nothing up to that point had come with this level of concrete evidence. And the most surprising part was when he confirmed that, yes, in addition to the victims Alex identified, the FBI already had records of at least 5 similar complaints spread across other states. It was only a matter of time. The operation was authorized. And while the FBI worked on preparing the federal arrest warrant, Zachary knew there was still one pending mission: confronting Vanessa. He knew this would be one of the hardest moments. It wasn't about fighting anymore, or saving a marriage. It was about laying the raw truth on the table. She needed to see who, exactly, the man she was destroying an entire family for really was. Zachary went straight to the house where Marcus was living with Vanessa. He knocked on the door, and when she opened it, she was completely surprised. Her face changed instantly, total shock, as if she had seen a ghost. Before she could say anything, he took a deep breath and spoke firmly, "I just want you to listen to me. First, where are the kids?" She, somewhat confused, quickly replied, "They're at school." And then, frightened, she asked, "How did you find me?" "That doesn't matter, just listen," he responded, looking her in the eyes. Without giving her space to argue, he entered, placed the folder on the table, opened it, and began spreading out the photos, printouts of conversations, fraudulent contracts, bank records, GPS tracking, and images that simply destroyed any illusion she still had. Every word was a punch. He revealed who Marcus was, explained the pattern of behavior, showed the history of frauds, the women he had financially destroyed, and the fake companies set up using the victims' data. Then, he pulled out the heaviest document, proof that Marcus, in recent weeks, had already requested 2 loans using Vanessa's information at institutions in tax havens. She had no idea. Vanessa turned pale, her hands began to tremble. She tried to deny it, tried not to believe it. But the evidence was there, alive, irrefutable. When she saw images of Marcus with another woman, in the same week he told her they were looking for houses together, she broke down. She started crying, sobbing, falling into despair. She tried apologizing, tried justifying. She said she felt abandoned, fragile, needy, that she didn't realize who he really was. But Zachary cut her off immediately. He said none of that justified destroying an entire family. He told her she hadn't just betrayed a marriage, but her own history, her kids, and everything they had built together. While Vanessa tried to process it all, her phone vibrated. It was a message from Marcus. A simple, direct message, as if nothing was happening: "Everything's ready for the trip. I'll pick you up at 6 p.m. Zachary looked at her and, with a firm voice, said, "You're not going anywhere. Neither is he." That same afternoon, a joint operation by the FBI, in partnership with the Charlotte Police Department, was launched. Arrest and search warrants were executed at 2 offices and Marcus's house. He was detained as he was leaving a hotel accompanied by another woman. He was relaxed, smiling, with that same air of superiority, until the moment he saw the agents approaching, identifying themselves, and placing him under arrest. The handcuffs clicked shut, and for the first time in his life, Marcus Callahan lost that arrogant smile. He was immediately taken into custody, formally charged with international banking fraud, falsified identity, money laundering, organized crime, and financial fraud against institutions in U.S. and international territory. In the days that followed, the media exploded with the news. Newspapers, websites, and TV stations reported the arrest of businessman Marcus Callahan, detailing the fraud schemes in tax havens, the scams against women and investors, and the laundering of millions of dollars over the past few years. Zachary watched the reports, holding a mix of relief, sadness, and indignation. Relief for exposing who that man really was. Sadness for seeing his family destroyed. And indignation, because deep down, he knew all of this could have been avoided if Vanessa had seen it sooner. But on that day, one thing became very clear to Zachary: he lost a marriage, but he saved himself, his kids, and prevented more people from having their lives destroyed by that criminal. The divorce went through quickly. After everything came to light, there was nothing left to discuss. Vanessa, emotionally shattered, signed the papers without resistance. The loan Marcus tried to take out using her name wasn't approved in time. Thanks to Zachary's report to the FBI, the transactions were blocked before being finalized, and she narrowly escaped carrying a multi-million-dollar debt that would have ruined her life. Over time, the kids began to understand the whole truth. Slowly, they started talking to their dad again, resuming the bond that had always existed but had been distorted by lies. Zachary made sure to be present, participating in their daily lives, showing that despite everything, a father's love doesn't change. To be closer, he rented a house just a few blocks away from the family's old residence. Vanessa moved back into the house she once shared with Zachary and the kids. But now, everything was different. That woman who used to flash smiles, greet neighbors, and seem to have a perfect life, was now seen in a different light. People looked, whispered, judged. The neighbor's gaze was no longer the same, and she felt the weight of her own choices. And so, life went on. Each person on their own path, carrying the marks of what happened. Zachary, stronger and more aware of his own worth, moved forward, surrounded by his children and the people who truly mattered. Vanessa, on the other hand, learned the hardest way possible that sometimes, one wrong choice doesn't just destroy a marriage, it destroys a reputation, a history, and a part of your own soul. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.